Jake Morrison stared at the encrypted message on his screen and felt his blood turn cold. The words seemed impossible, yet there they were in official council script. The Galactic Council had voted 847 to 1 to classify humanity as a hazardous species. Immediate containment protocols were now in effect. He read the message 3 times before the full meaning hit him. Containment protocols meant isolation. It meant humanity would be cut off from the galaxy, trapped in their home system. Like criminals in a cage. 20 years of peaceful cooperation, trade agreements, and joint scientific missions had just been thrown away with a single vote. The communication came directly from Earth Command, marked with the highest security clearance. Jake had been commanding New Geneva Station for 8 years, watching it grow from a small outpost into humanity's primary diplomatic hub. Now he was being ordered to evacuate everyone within 48 hours. Dr. Lisa Warren knocked on his office door and entered without waiting for permission. Her face was pale and her hands shook as she carried a datapad. Lisa had spent the last 5 years working with alien scientists on breakthrough medical research. She was one of the most respected xenobiologists in the sector. "Jake, I need to show you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been analyzing the evidence the council used to make their decision. It's all fake." She placed the datapad on his desk and activated the holographic display. Genetic charts and behavioral analysis reports filled the air between them. Jake had seen similar reports before during routine diplomatic exchanges, but these were different. The data showed humans as aggressive, unpredictable, and genetically predisposed to violence. "This genetic sequence here," Lisa pointed to a section of the display, "it doesn't exist in human DNA. I've run it through every database we have. Someone manufactured this evidence and presented it as legitimate research." Jake leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He had suspected something was wrong when the vote happened so quickly. Usually the council debated for months before making major decisions. This time they had called an emergency session and voted within hours. "Who provided the evidence?" he asked. "The Zephyrian Empire," Lisa replied. "Ambassador Thexcall personally presented it to the council 3 days ago. He claimed their scientists had been studying human behavior patterns and discovered we were a threat to galactic stability." Jake understood now. The Zephyrians had been losing ground to human traders and diplomats for years. Human ships were faster and more efficient. Human negotiators were better at finding peaceful solutions to conflicts. Human scientists were making breakthrough discoveries that put other species to shame. The Zephyrians had found a way to eliminate their competition without firing a single shot. The communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Captain Ben Rodriguez appeared on the screen from the bridge of the exploration vessel Aurora. Ben's ship was currently 3 sectors away, leading a joint expedition with Altarian researchers to study ancient ruins. "Jake, we just received recall orders," Ben said. "All human vessels are to return to Sol Space immediately. No explanations given? My Altarian colleagues are asking what's happening, but Earth Command won't let me tell them anything." "Follow your orders, Ben," Jake replied. "Bring everyone home. I'll explain when you get here." The screen went dark and Jake turned back to Lisa. She was staring at the fake genetic data with tears in her eyes. Her life's work had been building bridges between species through science. Now, those bridges were being burned by lies and fear. "We can't just leave without telling them the truth," she said. The Kepler Coalition, the Meridian Traders, even some of the council members who voted against this. They deserve to know they've been manipulated. Jake shook his head. "Our orders are clear. Complete withdrawal with no explanations. Earth Command wants the galaxy to think we're accepting the council's decision without protest." Over the next 18 hours, Jake watched as human civilization packed up and disappeared from the galaxy. Trade stations that had operated for decades powered down their systems and departed. Scientific research facilities transmitted their final data to Earth and went dark. Diplomatic missions closed their doors and evacuated their staff. The aliens seemed confused at first. Many had expected humans to fight the council's decision or at least protest formally. Instead, they found empty offices and automated messages explaining that all human operations were being suspended indefinitely. Ambassador Helen Cross had been humanity's voice on the council for 12 years. She was respected even by species that disagreed with human policies. When Jake contacted her to confirm evacuation procedures, she seemed strangely calm about the situation. "I've been expecting something like this," she told him over the secure channel. "The Zephyrians have been building a coalition against us for months. They convinced enough council members that human success was a threat to galactic balance." "What do we do now?" Jake asked. "We go home and we prepare," Helen replied. "The galaxy thinks it will be better off without us. Let them find out if that's true." Helen's final act as Earth's ambassador was to record a message and leave it in her quarters. For who would claim the office next? Jake learned about it later from the Kepler Coalition representative who found it. The message was simple but haunting. When you realize what you've lost, it will be too late to ask for it back. The evacuation of New Geneva Station took exactly 47 hours. Jake made sure every piece of human technology was removed or destroyed. Nothing would be left behind for other species to study or copy. The station's alien staff and visitors were given transport to nearby systems with no explanation for the sudden departure. As Jake's transport ship cleared the station's docking bay for the last time, he looked back at the massive structure humanity had built. Soon it would be occupied by other species or left to drift empty in space. Either way, it would no longer serve as a symbol of human cooperation with the galaxy. The journey back to Soul Space took 6 days. During that time, Jake received reports from across human space. Every colony, every outpost, every ship was heading home. The galaxy was waking up to find that humanity had simply vanished overnight. Some alien governments tried to contact Earth directly, demanding explanations for the sudden departure. Others celebrated, believing they had successfully removed a dangerous rival. A few, like the Kepler Coalition, sent messages expressing confusion and regret about the Council's decision. Earth Command's response to all alien communications was the same: silence. Jake's ship finally entered Soul Space and he saw something that took his breath away. Hundreds of human vessels filled the space around Earth and Mars. Ships that had been exploring distant galaxies, stations that had been homes to thousands of people, entire mobile colonies that had been establishing new worlds. All of it was coming home. As his transport approached Earth, Jake realized this wasn't a retreat, it was a gathering. Humanity hadn't been defeated by the Council's vote. They had been freed from the burden of trying to prove they belonged in a galaxy that feared them. The aliens had wanted to see what they could accomplish without human interference. Soon they would get their wish, and Jake suspected they would regret it more than they could possibly imagine. 6 months had passed since humanity vanished from galactic space, and the council members were starting to pat themselves on the back. Speaker Veltar of the Antarian Federation opened each session by congratulating the council on their peaceful resolution of the human problem. Trade had been redistributed among the remaining species and most alien governments reported increased profits. The Vorthic hegemony was particularly pleased with the results. They had immediately claimed 3 former human mining colonies and were extracting rare minerals at record rates. General Kexler boasted to anyone who would listen that removing the humans had been the smartest decision the council ever made, but some cracks were starting to show in this perfect picture. The Meridian Trade Collective had called an emergency meeting after discovering their shipping costs had jumped by 30%. Their logistics coordinator, a spider-like creature named Zilkson, spread charts across the conference table showing route inefficiencies that were costing billions of credits. The humans were providing optimization algorithms that we didn't even know we were using, Zilkson explained to the worried trade representatives. Their computers were constantly calculating the most efficient paths between systems. Without those calculations, our cargo ships are taking longer routes and burning more fuel. Similar problems were popping up across the galaxy. The Altarian Medical Consortium was struggling with a plague outbreak on Zarian Prime. Their research team had been working with human doctors who were on the verge of a breakthrough treatment. When the humans disappeared, they took their research with them, and the plague continued to spread. Dr. Amy Foster monitored these developments from a hidden research station in the Kuiper Belt. Earth Command had tasked her with keeping track of galactic events, and she was documenting everything in detailed reports. Amy had worked with many of the alien scientists who were now struggling without human support. Her latest report made for interesting reading. The galaxy was experiencing 17 separate diplomatic crises that showed no signs of resolution. Human negotiators had been quietly preventing these situations from escalating for years. Without their mediation, old grudges and territorial disputes were flaring into open conflicts. The irony wasn't lost on Amy that humanity had become the galaxy's problem solvers without anyone realizing it. Humans had a talent for finding creative solutions that satisfied multiple parties. They could see connections and possibilities that other species missed. Now that talent was gone and the galaxy was slowly falling apart. General Carl Mason was overseeing the completion of Project Homecoming from his command center on Mars. The project had been in development for 5 years, but the Council's vote had accelerated the timeline dramatically. Massive orbital platforms surrounded Earth, Mars, and the outer planets, each one bristling with weapons and defensive systems that no alien species had ever seen. Carl watched the final components being installed on the Jupiter platform and smiled grimly. The aliens thought humanity had retreated in defeat, but they had actually used the time to build the most advanced defensive network in galactic history. The quantum fold barriers alone would stop any invasion fleet before it got within 1 billion kilometers of Earth. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian Empire was making its move. Grand Admiral Thexton had convinced his government that humanity's departure proved they were weak and cowardly. Zephyrian fleets began expanding aggressively into former human territories, claiming exclusive mining rights and establishing military bases. The Zephyrians had always been bullies, but human presence had kept them in check. Human traders offered better deals, and human diplomats exposed Zephyrian lies before they could take root. Without that opposition, the Zephyrians were free to intimidate weaker species into submission. They started with the peaceful Luminari, a race of crystalline beings who had never developed military technology. Zephyrian warships surrounded the Luminari homeworld and demanded tribute in the form of rare crystals that grew naturally on their planet. When the Luminari asked the Council for help, they were told that resource disputes were outside Council jurisdiction. The truth was that several Council members were afraid of the Zephyrian military. Without human ships to back up Council authority, they had no way to enforce their own laws. The Zephyrians knew this and were taking full advantage of the situation. Other species were starting to realize what they had lost. The Kepler Coalition had maintained friendly relations with humanity even after the Council vote. Their science minister, Chancellor Crixena, sent a diplomatic mission to the edge of soul space, hoping to continue their research partnerships. The Kepler ships found something that shocked them completely. The entire Sol system was surrounded by an energy barrier that their sensors couldn't penetrate. They tried every communication frequency they knew but received no response from the humans inside. It was as if humanity had sealed themselves away. From the galaxy forever, Captain Steve Parker monitored the Kepler ships from his command post on Titan. He had served as military liaison to the Kepler Coalition for 3 years and genuinely liked many of their people. But his orders were clear: no contact with any alien species until Earth Command decided otherwise. Steve watched the Kepler ships circle the barrier for 2 days before finally giving up and returning home. He knew Chancellor Crixena personally, and could imagine how frustrated she must be. The Keplers had always treated humans as equals and partners rather than threats or competitors, but Earth Command wasn't making exceptions for anyone. Humanity had tried the diplomatic approach for 20 years, and it had ended with them being classified as dangerous animals. Now they were taking a different path, and the galaxy would have to live with the consequences. Engineer Rachel Stone was working 18-hour days to complete the final phase of Project Homecoming. The defensive platforms were only part of the system. Hidden throughout Sol space were automated factories that could produce ships and weapons at an incredible rate. If the aliens ever tried to force their way in, they would face not just barriers and platforms, but an endless stream of human warships. Rachel had helped design the manufacturing systems, and she knew their capabilities better than anyone. The factories could build more ships in a month than most alien species produced in a year. Combined with human technological advantages, it would make Sol space absolutely impregnable. The first major test of the new galactic order came when border disputes between three species erupted into actual warfare. The Vorthik attacked Centauri colonies over mining rights. The Centauri retaliated by destroying Vorthik cargo ships. Within weeks, both sides were using biological weapons that had been banned for centuries. The Council called emergency sessions and passed resolutions demanding peace, but they had no way to enforce their decisions. Human peacekeeping forces had always been the muscle behind Council authority. Without them, the Council's words were just noise that the warring species could safely ignore. More conflicts began, breaking out as other species realized the Council was powerless to stop them. Old territorial disputes that had been dormant for decades suddenly flared back to life. Trade wars escalated into shooting wars. Pirates and raiders operated freely in systems that had been safe for generations. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson about the difference between peace and the absence of war. Peace required constant work, careful negotiation, and the occasional show of force to keep troublemakers in line. Humans had been providing all of that. Without asking for recognition or reward, now they were gone, and the galaxy was discovering just how much work it took to keep civilization running smoothly. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galaxy was burning, and Commander Steve Parker watched it all from his command center on Mars. The surveillance networks that humans had quietly maintained throughout space were still functioning, sending back reports of wars, famines, and collapsed governments across dozens of star systems. The Vorthik Centauri conflict had escalated beyond anyone's worst fears. Both sides were now using weapons that turned entire planets into poisoned wastelands. The biological agents they deployed didn't just kill soldiers. They destroyed all life on infected worlds for generations to come. 3 systems had already been abandoned as uninhabitable death zones. Steve read the latest intelligence reports with growing disgust. The Zephyrian Empire had enslaved the entire luminary species and was forcing them to work in crystal mines under horrific conditions. Thousands of the peaceful crystalline beings died every day from exhaustion and brutal treatment. The Zephyrians didn't care because they saw the luminari as nothing more than efficient mining tools. The Council still met regularly, but their sessions had become pointless theater. They passed resolutions condemning various conflicts and called for peace talks that never happened. Without human military backing, their words carried no weight, and everyone knew it. Speaker Veltar had aged 10 years in the past 12 months as he watched his authority crumble, but the worst news was yet to come. Deep space monitoring stations had detected something that made Steve's blood run cold. The Devourers were moving. Again, long-range scanners showed massive fleets emerging from the dark space beyond the galactic rim where they had been dormant for 3 centuries. The Devourers were an ancient enemy that every species feared but few really understood. They were cybernetic creatures who consumed entire worlds to fuel their expansion. Their ships were living beings merged with advanced technology, capable of adapting to any weapon used against them. They had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. Once, before engineer Rachel Stone burst into Steve's command center with a datapad clutched in her trembling hands. She had been monitoring the deep space networks, and her face was pale with terror. Rachel had studied the historical records of the last Devourer invasion, and she knew what was coming. "They're not just moving," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming in numbers we've never seen before. The scout fleets alone are 3 times larger than their entire invasion force from 300 years ago." Steve studied the scanner data and felt his heart sink. The Devourers had been building their strength in the dark space for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. Somehow they had sensed that Galactic defenses were at their weakest point in generations, the last time the Devourers attacked. It had taken the combined fleets of every major species to stop them. Human warships had played a crucial role in that victory, using innovative tactics and technologies that caught the enemy off guard. The peace treaty that followed had established the outer defense networks that kept the Devourers at bay. Those defense networks were now falling apart. Without human maintenance and coordination, the automated systems were failing one by one. Alien species that had been assigned to maintain specific sectors were either at war with each other or too busy with their own problems to care about distant early warning stations. Senator Patricia Wells received the first desperate communication from former allies while she was reviewing defense preparations in the Luna facility. Chancellor Crixana of the Kepler Coalition appeared on her screen looking haggard and defeated. The normally composed alien leader was clearly fighting back tears. "Patricia, we need your help," Crixana said. "The outer defenses in Sector 7 have gone dark. Our ships can't reach the maintenance stations because of the war zones. We think the Devourers have already broken through in 3 locations." Patricia had worked with Crixana for years building the research partnerships that made both species stronger. She genuinely liked the Kepler leader and wanted to help, but her orders were clear. Humanity was no longer responsible for galactic security. "I'm sorry, Crixana," Patricia replied. "Earth Command has classified all human military assets as defensive only. We're not authorized to operate outside soul space." The Chancellor's expression shifted from hope to despair. "You don't understand. If the outer perimeter falls, the Devourers will sweep through the core systems in months. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about survival." After ending the call, Patricia sat in her office staring at reports that painted an increasingly grim picture. The galaxy's military forces were scattered and weakened by constant warfare. The Zephyrian Empire controlled the largest fleet, but they were spread thin trying to maintain their conquered territories. The other major powers were either fighting each other or dealing with internal rebellions. Admiral Tony Baker was reviewing similar reports from his command ship in the asteroid belt. His wife, Colonel Nancy Baker, had been arguing with him for weeks about humanity's response to the crisis. Nancy believed they had a moral obligation to help innocent people regardless of what their governments had done. "Billions of people are going to die, Tony," Nancy said during one of their heated discussions. "Children who had nothing to do with the Council's decision. Scientists and artists and teachers who just want to live peaceful lives. How can we stand by and watch them be slaughtered?" Tony understood his wife's feelings, but he also understood the bigger picture. "The Council classified us as dangerous animals and tried to cage us like pets," he replied. "They chose fear over cooperation. Now they have to live with the consequences of that choice." The first reports of actual Devourer attacks came from the Rim territories. Entire colonies simply vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty buildings and scorch marks where cities used to stand. The few survivors who escaped described ships that seemed to be alive, with hull plating that writhed and weapons that adapted to whatever defenses they encountered. The Council finally swallowed their pride and sent an official delegation to Soul Space. Speaker Veltar himself led the mission, carrying formal documents that authorized humanity to take whatever action they deemed necessary to stop the Devourer threat. It was the closest thing to a surrender that the proud alien leader could manage. The delegation found the quantum barriers around Soul Space as impenetrable as ever. They broadcast their surrender terms on every frequency, begging for some response from the humans inside. For 3 days they received nothing but silence. On the 4th day, a single message appeared on their communication screens. It came from Colonel Frank White, Earth's new military liaison for external affairs. The message was brief and cold. "Submit your terms for unconditional surrender." The Council representatives were stunned. They had expected negotiations, perhaps some demands for reparations or territory. Instead, they were being asked to surrender their independence completely. Speaker Veltar's aide, a young diplomat named Hexara suggested they refuse and try to handle the Devourer crisis themselves. With what? Veltar asked bitterly. Half our fleets are fighting each other, and the other half are spread across the galaxy trying to maintain order. The humans are our only hope of survival. The delegation tried to negotiate, offering various concessions and compromises. They proposed giving humanity permanent seats on the Council, exclusive trading rights in certain sectors, even territorial concessions that would expand human space. Each offer was met with the same response from Colonel White: unconditional surrender or nothing. Meanwhile, the Devourer advance continued. 3 more systems went silent in a single week. Refugee ships packed with desperate families fled toward the Galactic core, carrying stories of horror that made even hardened military officers weep. The enemy wasn't just conquering territory. They were erasing entire civilizations from existence. The Zephyrian Empire, faced with annihilation, made a desperate gamble. Grand Admiral Vexthan assembled every warship under his command and launched a direct attack on the Soul Barrier. He believed that if he could break through and capture Earth, he could force humanity to defend the galaxy on Zephyrian terms. The Zephyrian fleet was the largest military force assembled in galactic history. Over 10,000 warships approached the Sol system in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for battle. Vexthan expected a massive fight that would test both sides to their limits. Instead, his entire fleet simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris field, no energy discharge that their sensors could detect. One moment, 10,000 ships were approaching Earth. The next moment, there was empty space. The few scout vessels that had hung back reported that the main fleet had simply vanished as if it had never existed. The message was clear to anyone paying attention. Humanity was no longer the same species that had left quietly a year ago. They had spent their isolation developing weapons and defenses that made them effectively invincible. The galaxy's former protectors had become its potential conquerors. The Emergency Council session was the most desperate gathering in galactic history, and Speaker Veltar could barely maintain order as panicked representatives shouted over each other. The Devourer fleets had consumed 12 star systems in the past month and showed no signs of slowing down. Entire sectors were being evacuated as refugees fled toward the galactic core in whatever ships they could find. Admiral Tony Baker watched the chaos unfold from his command center in the asteroid belt. Human intelligence networks were still monitoring. Council communications and the intercepted messages painted a picture of complete civilizational collapse. The proud alien governments that had voted to contain humanity were now begging each other for help that none of them could provide. The Altarian Medical Consortium had lost their 3 primary research worlds to the Devourers. Centuries of medical knowledge and breakthrough treatments were gone forever, erased along with the billions of people who had created them. The Meridian Trade Collective was bankrupt as their shipping routes became war zones or devourer hunting grounds. Even the mighty Vorthak hegemony was crumbling under the pressure. General Kexler, who had celebrated humanity's departure so loudly, was now calling for unity among all remaining species. His latest broadcast to the Council was a far cry from his earlier arrogance as he admitted that Vorthak military doctrine was completely inadequate against the Devourer threat. Colonel Nancy Baker had been monitoring the refugee streams, and her reports made for heartbreaking reading. Families torn apart as they fled from world to world, always staying one step ahead of the advancing enemy. Children who had never known war watching their parents weep as they abandoned everything they had ever owned. "We have to do something." "Tony," Nancy said for the 100th time as she entered his office with the latest casualty reports. "These aren't soldiers or politicians. They're innocent people who never voted to classify us as dangerous. They don't deserve to die for their leaders' mistakes." Tony looked at his wife and saw the pain in her eyes. Nancy had always been the more compassionate of the two, quick to help anyone in need regardless of the personal cost. It was one of the things he loved most about her, but it also made situations like this incredibly difficult. "I know they don't deserve it," he replied quietly, "but our orders are clear. Earth Command wants the galaxy to understand the full cost of rejecting human partnership. If we step in now and save them, nothing will have changed. They'll go back to taking us for granted the moment the crisis is over. The Council's second delegation to Soul Space was led by Chancellor Crixena of the Kepler Coalition. She had volunteered for the mission because of her long friendship with human diplomats, hoping that personal relationships might succeed where formal negotiations had failed. Her small fleet of ships waited at the edge of the quantum barrier while she broadcast message after message. "Patricia, I know you're listening," Crixena said during one of her personal appeals to Senator Patricia Wells. "We worked together for years. You know, I always respected humanity and fought against the containment vote. Please don't let our friendship end like this." Patricia received the messages in her office on Luna and felt her heart breaking with each one. Crixena had indeed been a true friend to humanity, one of the few alien leaders who had genuinely treated humans as equals. But friendship couldn't override the larger strategic situation that Earth Command was managing. The quantum barriers remained impenetrable, and Colonel Frank White's responses to all diplomatic overtures remained the same. Unconditional surrender was the only option Earth would consider. The Council could submit completely to human authority or watch their civilization die at the hands of the DVOURERs. Some Council members advocated for acceptance of human terms. The Kepler Coalition and several smaller species were willing to trade their independence for survival. But the major powers like the Antarian Federation and what remained of the Zephyrian Empire refused to surrender their sovereignty to the species they had tried to cage. The debate raged for days while more systems fell to the Devourer advance. Each hour of discussion cost thousands of lives as the enemy fleets consumed world after world. The Council was paralyzed by pride and fear, unable to make the hard choice that might save them. Dr. Patricia Adams finally broke her silence after receiving dozens of personal messages from former colleagues. The woman who had once headed Earth's Interspecies Ethics Committee recorded a response that was broadcast across the galaxy on every communication frequency. Her words were calm but carried the weight of absolute judgment. "We offered you partnership and you chose segregation," she said, looking directly into the camera. "We offered you protection and you chose suspicion. We offered you peace and you chose fear. Every world that falls to the Devourers is a monument to your prejudice. The blood of every innocent victim is on your hands alone, not ours." The message had its intended effect. Riots broke out on several Council worlds as populations realized their governments had doomed them through incompetence and fear. The Altarian Federation government fell completely as angry citizens stormed their capital demanding immediate surrender to humanity, but it was too late for many systems. The Devourer of Fleets had adapted to every weapon the combined galactic forces could deploy against them. Their ships grew stronger with each battle, incorporating destroyed enemy vessels into their own hulls. What had started as an invasion was becoming a feeding frenzy as the enemy consumed everything in their path. Commander Kevin Davis was preparing his fleet in the outer Sol system when the final desperate attempt at negotiation arrived. A massive refugee convoy led by the last Zephyrian warships approached the barrier carrying nearly 1 million civilian evacuees from the war zones. Grand Admiral Thexton himself was aboard the flagship, the same alien who had orchestrated humanity's exile. The Zephyrian leader's message was broadcast on open channels so everyone could hear his humiliation. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I let fear and jealousy cloud my judgment. I turned the Council against humanity because I was afraid of your success. Now, my people are dying for my mistakes and I'm begging you to save them." It was a complete admission of guilt and responsibility, exactly what Earth Command had been waiting to hear. But even this wasn't enough to change human policy. The refugees were allowed to enter Soul Space and given sanctuary, but only after Thexton formally surrendered himself to human authority as a war criminal. The galaxy watched in shock as one of their most powerful leaders was taken into custody by human forces. It sent a clear message about what complete surrender would mean. Humanity wasn't just demanding military control. They were claiming the right to judge and punish those who had wronged them. Meanwhile, the Devourer advance continued deeper into civilized space. Their scouts had reached the Middle Territories and were probing the defenses of major population centers. The enemy was no longer content with consuming rim worlds. They were targeting the heart of galactic civilization. Engineer Rachel Stone completed the final upgrades to the Sol Defense network just as reports came in of Devourer fleets approaching the core systems. The automated factories were now operating at full capacity, producing ships and weapons at a rate that defied belief. Humanity was ready for war, but they were waiting for the right moment to reveal their hand. The turning point came when the Devourers reached Antaria Prime, capital world of the Federation and seat of council power. The planet's defenses lasted exactly 4 hours before the enemy broke through and began their consumption process. Billions of lives were snuffed out in a matter of days as the world that had hosted galactic government for centuries became a lifeless husk. Speaker Veltar died with his world, refusing to evacuate even when his aides begged him to flee. His final message to the galaxy was a formal admission of failure and a plea for humanity to save what remained of civilization. It was the complete surrender that Earth Command had demanded from the beginning. The surviving council members gathered on Kepler Prime and voted unanimously to accept human terms. There was no debate, no negotiation, no attempt to maintain their dignity. They signed documents transferring all military authority to Earth and formally requesting human intervention to stop the Devourer threat. Colonel Frank White received their surrender and smiled grimly as he forwarded it to Earth Command. The galaxy had finally learned the price of rejecting human partnership, but the lesson had cost billions of lives and the destruction of worlds that could never be recovered. The quantum barriers around Sol space finally opened for the first time in over a year, and Captain Mike Johnson watched the alien delegation approach Earth with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. The survivors of the Galactic Council were coming to surrender completely, bringing with them the formal documents that would make humanity the undisputed rulers of what remained of galactic civilization. Johnson's battleship New Frontier had been rebuilt during the isolation period and now bristled with weapons that no alien species had ever seen. The ship's hull was made from materials that could adapt to any attack, while its weapon systems drew power directly from controlled black holes. It was a demonstration of how far human technology had advanced while the galaxy burned around them. The alien ships looked pathetic by comparison. Most showed battle damage from encounters with Devourer scouts, and their crews were clearly exhausted from months of constant fighting and fleeing. These were the representatives of species that had once commanded respect throughout the galaxy, now reduced to begging for protection from the humans they had tried to cage. President Lavra Thompson waited for the delegation in the rebuilt United Nations building on Earth. She had chosen the location deliberately for its symbolic value, standing in the same chamber where humanity had once begged for acceptance into galactic society. Now the roles were completely reversed, and she intended to make sure everyone understood the change. The alien representatives filed into the chamber, like condemned prisoners approaching their execution. Chancellor Crixena of the Kepler Coalition looked older and more tired than ever, her normally bright skin dulled by stress and grief. The surviving Zephyrian officials kept their eyes down, unable to meet the gaze of the humans they had betrayed. Speaker Veltar's replacement, a nervous Altarian named Kexival, carried the surrender documents in his trembling hands. The papers formally transferred all military command authority to Earth and granted humanity jurisdiction over any territory they deemed necessary for galactic defense. It was everything Colonel Frank White had demanded and more. "We accept your surrender," President Thompson said simply, taking the documents without ceremony. "However, acceptance comes with conditions that are not negotiable. Humanity will assume complete responsibility for galactic defense, but we will do so on our terms alone." She outlined the new reality with cold precision. Human fleets would be stationed in every major star system with authority to intervene in any conflict without permission or warning. Human governors would oversee the rebuilding of devastated worlds, with alien governments serving in advisory roles only. Any species that refused to accept human authority would be left to face the remaining Devourer fleets alone. Commander Kevin Davis was already preparing the largest military operation in human history from his command ship in Earth orbit. The fleet that emerged from soul space was beyond anything the aliens had imagined possible. Thousands of ships moved in perfect formation, each one incorporating technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The human vessels didn't just travel faster than light. They folded space around themselves to arrive instantly at their destinations. Their weapons didn't just destroy enemy ships. They reached across dimensions to strike targets that should have been protected by distance and shields. The aliens watched in awe and terror as humanity revealed the true extent of their capabilities. The first engagement with the Devourers took place in the Zarian system, where enemy fleets had been consuming the remnants of the medical consortium's research facilities. Davis led the attack personally, his flagship emerging from folded space directly behind the largest Devourer vessel. The battle was over in minutes. Human weapons tore through Devourer hulls that had adapted to resist every other form of attack in the galaxy. The enemy ships tried to incorporate human technology as they had done with alien vessels, but the human systems were designed to self-destruct rather than be captured or copied within hours. Every Devourer ship in the system was destroyed, and their remains were collected for study. The aliens who witnessed the battle couldn't believe what they had seen. Humanity had accomplished in one engagement what the combined galactic fleets had failed to do. In months of fighting, the campaign against the remaining Devourer fleets lasted exactly 3 months. Human task forces appeared throughout the galaxy, systematically hunting down and destroying every enemy vessel they could find. The ancient threat that had nearly destroyed civilization was eliminated so thoroughly that not a single Devourer ship escaped to dark space, but victory came with a price that the alien species hadn't anticipated. Humanity didn't withdraw their forces once the threat was eliminated. Instead, they established permanent bases in every system they had liberated, making it clear that human authority was now a permanent fixture of galactic life. Admiral Tony Baker was appointed as the first human military governor of the galaxy, with authority over all non-human military forces. His wife Nancy became the head of the new Refugee Resettlement Authority, working to rebuild the worlds that had been destroyed during the crisis. Their appointment sent a clear message about the new power structure. The rebuilding process was efficient but entirely under human control. Alien governments could make suggestions and requests, but all final decisions came from human administrators. Species that had once prided themselves on their independence found themselves following orders from the humans they had tried to eliminate. Ambassador Helen Cross returned to her old office, but now she held the title of High Commissioner for Galactic Affairs, the same chamber where she had once begged the Council to reconsider their containment vote was now the headquarters of Human Galactic Administration. She kept her original farewell message on her desk as a reminder of how completely things had changed. The aliens who came to petition for various favors and permissions had to wait in the same lobby where human diplomats had once been kept waiting. The irony was deliberate and everyone understood it. Humanity was making sure that no one forgot who had been wronged and who was now in charge. Dr. Patricia Adams was appointed to head the new Interspecies Ethics Board. But unlike her old position, this one came with real authority to enforce decisions. She oversaw war crimes trials for alien leaders who had committed atrocities during the chaos, including several former council members who had supported the containment vote. The trials were conducted fairly, but with human judges making the final verdicts. Grand Admiral Vexton was sentenced to life imprisonment for his role in starting the crisis that led to billions of deaths. Other officials received punishments ranging from exile to forced labor on reconstruction projects. A young Kepler diplomat named Zexara approached Helen Cross during one of the regular petition sessions. The diplomat had been assigned to request permission for her species to establish a new colony in a system that had been abandoned during the Devourer invasion. Her question revealed how completely the balance of power had shifted. High Commissioner, she asked hesitantly, will humanity ever forgive the Council's betrayal? Will there come a time when we can be partners again instead of subjects? Helen looked at the young alien and remembered herself at that age, full of hope about interspecies cooperation and mutual respect. The memory made her feel older than her years as she considered her response carefully. We didn't leave because we were angry, she finally said. We left because we were tired of being taken for granted. You wanted to see what the galaxy looked like without humans keeping the peace. Now you know the answer to that question. She gestured toward the window that looked out over the rebuilt city, where human and alien workers labored together under human supervision. The price of that lesson was paid in blood, and it wasn't human blood that was spilled. We tried partnership and you chose fear. Now you have protection, but it comes with the understanding that humanity will never again allow itself to be vulnerable to galactic politics. The young diplomat left without getting her colony permit approved. Helen added the request to the pile of applications that would be reviewed by human administrators who would make decisions based on human priorities and interests. The galaxy had wanted to see humans as either partners or prisoners, and they had chosen prisoners. Now they were learning that there had been a third option they never considered. Humanity had achieved something that no species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had made themselves indispensable by proving their worth through absence rather than presence. The Council's fear of human aggression had created exactly what they sought to prevent, but in a way none of them had anticipated. The humans weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were reluctant rulers who had been forced into dominance by the short-sightedness and prejudice of those they now governed. They provided protection and order, but always with the understanding that this arrangement existed because the aliens had proven they couldn't be trusted with their own freedom. The galaxy had peace again, but it was a peace imposed by human will and maintained by human strength. The species that had once voted to contain humanity now lived in a cage of their own making, protected by the very people they had tried to eliminate. It was a lesson in consequences that would echo through history for generations.